So, in other words, these dreams were usually important in their culture. Unlike what we would know, what we would understand of dreams. And when we step into this text, that we're going to find out that it creates a significant issue that is at the heart of the nation of Babylon right now. So let's look at this book in chapter 2, starting in verse 1. Through 11. Now, in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, and his spirit was troubled, and his sleep left him. Then the king said to call in the magicians, the conjurers, the sorcerers, the Chaldeans, to tell the king his dreams. So they came in and stood before the king. Then the king said to them, I had a dream, and my spirit is troubled to know the dream. Then the Chaldeans spoke to the king in Aramaic, O king, live forever. Say the dream to your servants, and we will declare the interpretation. The king answered and said to the Chaldeans, the word from me is firm. If you do not make known to me the dream and its interpretation, you will be torn limb from limb, and your houses will be made a rubbish heap. But if you declare the dream and its interpretation, you will receive from me gifts and a reward and great glory. Therefore, declare to me the dream and its interpretation. They answered a second time and said, let the king say the dream to his servants, and we will declare the interpretation. The king answered and said, I know for certain that you are buying time, inasmuch as you have seen that the word from me is firm, that if you do not make the dream known to me, and there is only one law for you. Indeed, you have agreed together to speak lying and corrupt words before me until the time is changed. Therefore, say the dream to me, that I may know that you can declare it to me. You can declare to me its interpretations. The Chaldeans answered the king and said, there is not a man on earth who is able to declare the matter for the king, inasmuch as no great king or powerful ruler has ever asked about a matter like this of any magician, conjurer, or Chaldean. Moreover, the matter which the king asks is difficult. There is no one else who could declare it to the king except God's, whose dwelling place is not with the flesh. This establishes the framework in the time frame that we're in. It is the second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. It is a difficult incident what Nebuchadnezzar has experienced because he is rising into significant power. He is the most powerful man in the world at this given time, and he's rising in power. He hasn't come to the culmination of his power yet. But he is rising up into great power. This dream has troubled him to the degree that sleep is no longer coming to him. He is tossing and turning. Sleep is evading him. His thoughts are consumed by the nature of this dream. And remember, secret knowledge. He cannot understand it. Right? He doesn't know what to make of this dream, only that he needs an interpretation of it. Okay? We've seen before, right in the beginning, when we talked about it, in the ancient world, dreams were typically seen as a precursor to something to come. Or something that was portending something that was going to happen in the future. That something was going to occur to him or the nation or their armies or whatever. This is what they're looking at, right? So the dream has troubled him to the point that he can't sleep. He doesn't know what to make of it. He needs to know what the dream's about because he wants to understand if there's something that's coming that is bad. Or perhaps something that's coming that is good. Since they regarded dreams as communication between humans and gods, small g gods, this makes sense in their culture for them to seek an answer to this dream. Now notice, we don't know what the dream is. We don't have any idea what it is. So that highly respected skill of dream interpretation, that's what he wants to happen here. That's what he says. The magicians, the conjurers, the sorcerers. What do we know from the Jewish and the Christian point of view about magicians, conjurers, and sorcerers? Turn to Deuteronomy chapter 18, verses 9 through 14. Deuteronomy chapter 18, verses 9 through 14. It says, starting in verse 9, when you enter the land which Yahweh your God gives you, you shall not learn to imitate the abominations of those nations. There shall not be found among you anyone who makes his son or his daughter pass through the fire. That's child sacrifice. There shall not be any of you one who uses divination, one who practices soothsaying, or one who interprets omens, or a sorcerer, or one who is an enchanter, or a medium, or a spiritist, or one who inquires of the dead. For whoever does these things is an abomination to Yahweh, and because of these abominations, Yahweh your God will dispossess them from before you. You shall be blameless before Yahweh your God. For those nations which you shall dispossess, listen to those who practice soothsaying and to diviners, but as for you, Yahweh your God has not allowed you to do so. Daniel and his friends are in a nation that practices exactly these things that the Lord sees as an abomination. So consider that. They would have dream manuals. They would also have things like the Epic of Gilgamesh, which you might have heard of, right? That has dream interpretation inside of it. That is there, that makes numerous accounts of dreams and their interpretations. With this understanding, therefore, we can get behind what is happening to Nebuchadnezzar, right? As he calls them in, he says, I had a dream, and my spirit is troubled to know the dream, to know about the dream. He's sought out those that have the knowledge, that he thinks has the knowledge, as is the custom of the culture. He thinks that these people can give him the answer, but it is of such great importance. Think about what he does. In verse 4, they speak to him, and now we have chapter 2, verse 4. It will be Aramaic from here in the original language. It will be Aramaic from chapter 2, verse 4 through chapter 7, verse, it's either 8 or 28. It'll be in Aramaic. And remember we talked about that before, that the Aramaic has a tendency that you see what in here, you're dealing with things. The Hebrew text has to deal with Israelite things, and whereas the Aramaic text has to deal with Babylonian issues. And we are clearly into Babylonian issues that is going on here. This dream interpretation. So he says, then the Chaldeans spoke to the king in Aramaic, O king, live forever. Say the dream to your servants, and we will declare the interpretation. But what does he do? What does Nebuchadnezzar say to them? The king answered and said to the Chaldeans, the word for me is firm. If you do not make known to me the dream, in other words, you have to tell me the dream. You have to prove your worth, you have to tell me the dream that I had. First. It's a two-part. And then he says you have to interpret it. Now, if not, what happens, it says you'll be torn limb from limb and your houses will be made into a rubbish heap. This is typical of the ancient world of the Akkadians, of the Babylonians and such. So if somebody was accursed or seen as wrong, they would be rendered limb from limb. Their houses would be torn to the ground, and the land upon which their house sat would be considered cursed. Nobody could live there ever again. Nobody could exist there ever again. So that's pretty typical for them. We could even say, Proverbs 14:12, that there is a way that seems right to man, but in the end is a way to death. He interprets this as something from one of his gods, and he's seeking the advice of men on what it says, what it means. Now I want you to rattle that around a little bit. We want to think about what he's saying, what he's bringing into this text, right? What he thinks about who the gods are, who the gods that he worships are, that they have secret knowledge, and it could be understood if I just have the right people to help me interpret it. If I kill the right sheep or the goat, and I look at the liver, this is literally what they would do. One of the things they would do, I could look at the liver and I could see what other shape it was, and that would tell me things about what I'm seeing or what I'm understanding. So, his mind won't be swayed. He says, if you interpret the dream, not only if you tell me the dream, but if you tell me what it means, you will receive from me gifts and a reward and great glory, and therefore declare to me that dream and the interpretation. These men have propped themselves up as wise men. They have fed at the king's table, we could say. They have positions of power in the culture as dream interpreters, as enchanters, as sorcerers, as purveyors of secret knowledge that other men don't have. Right? That they understand things that other men can't understand. And now they're being put to the test. The king, Nebuchadnezzar, has had such a dream that he says, okay, you guys are the wisest in the nation. You tell me the dream, and then tell me what it means. So, verse 7, it says, they answered a second time. He said, let the king say the dream to his servants, and we will declare an interpretation. Now just think about that for a second. Just tell us what the dream was, and then we can help you out in interpreting what is going on. We could give you a hand with regard to that. And he says, and the king answered and said, I know for certain that you are buying time, inasmuch as you have seen that the word from me is firm, that if you do not make the dream known to me, there is only one law for you. It's going to be the law of death. Right? Indeed, you have agreed together to speak lying and corrupt words before me until the time is changed. Therefore, say the dream to me that I may know that you can declare to me its interpretation. Now, I'm buzzing through this pretty quick because we haven't even got to Daniel and friends yet. Right? We're dealing with pagan thought processes. We're dealing with idol worship or the worship of demons, whatever you want to call it, is what we're dealing with here, right? But we're going to Daniel's going to come into the story very soon here. The Chaldeans and 10 men answer and said, the Chaldeans answered the king and said, there is not a man, the first wise thing they're saying, there is not a man on earth who is able to declare the matter for the king, inasmuch as no great king or powerful ruler has ever asked about a matter like this of any magician, conjurer, or Chaldean. In other words, it's that piece that says, tell me what the dream was that I had. They're saying nobody can do that. And it says, moreover, the matter which the king asks is difficult, and there is no one else who could declare it to the king except God's, whose dwelling place is not with the flesh. The first wise thing they've probably ever said, right? They're declaring, listen, before the king, they're declaring their inability to do the job they're supposed to do. Think about that for a second. They have now said to the king, we can't do this. This is something that we can't accomplish. That is a wisdom that we don't have. That we can't interpret this dream. We can't tell you what the dream is that you had. They've asked for the hint, tell us the dream, but we can't even do that. We can't do that. We can't. They can't tell him what the dream was that he had. They're worried, rightfully so, for their lives. And it is all revelatory to Nebuchadnezzar. The people that he has surrounded himself with to help him with these things, they're now declaring that they can't do it. They can't do what they've been paid to do. And he's only listening to people for worldly wisdom, is what he's doing. So we get into the second part now, 12 through 16, which is the decrees of men and the declarations of the man of God. 12 through 16, it says, so because of this, the king became indignant and very furious, and said for them to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. So the law went forth, and the wise men were to be killed, and they sought out Daniel and his friends to kill them too. Now, we remember from last week that Daniel and his friends, in verse 20 of chapter 1, it said, he found, and for every matter of wisdom and understanding which the king sought from them, Daniel and his 3 friends, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and conjurers who were in all of his kingdom. But guess what? They're on the chopping block too, because they fall within that whole category of wise men that is there. They must be killed too. Verse 14. Then Daniel replied with discretion and discernment. And if you're an English student, hendiadys is what that is. So it's two words used to describe one particular thing, one building on the other. Discretion and discernment, two words to give emphasis to one idea that is there. Daniel replied with discretion and discernment. So he is stewarding the wisdom that God has given him, and he responds to Arioch, the captain of the king's bodyguard, who had gone forth to kill the wise men of Babylon. And he answered and said to Arioch, a powerful official for the king, for what reason is the law from the king so urgent? Notice that he doesn't even know what this is about. Then Arioch made the matter known to Daniel. So Daniel went in and sought from the king that he would give him. Notice this. This takes confidence. And I want to say confidence in who? Confidence in the God that he worships, the true God. That he goes into the king. Daniel went in and sought from the king that the king would give him time in order that he might declare the interpretation to the king. Now think about that for a second. The word has gone out that you must all be killed. And Daniel has the foresight, or has the trust in the sovereign God of the universe to say, hey, hold on a second. I haven't even thought about this matter. Give me some time to do so. Now, we know that him and his friends are 10 times wiser than anybody else. So maybe that gives them a little up in the whole thing. But it still takes before the person that literally holds life and death in their hands, Nebuchadnezzar, the most powerful man in the world at this time, armies that reach to the horizon, armies that have undone their city and their temple, right? I'm just going to pause and just say this, that Daniel has unbelievable amounts of trust in Yahweh at this state, right? He is literally a slave in a foreign culture, and he has the wherewithal to ask for more time when everybody's to be killed that does what he does. They faithfully served this king, and he's asking for time. It's a bold move because the king has already declared the execution. It is trusting in God's plan. It is a faithful trust in God's plan for what's going to happen. 17 through 30, we have revelation from God. And because it's a bigger section, I'm going to treat it in a couple of verses, one or two verses at a time. It says, so look at what happens in verse 17. This is where the revelation comes. So now we have Daniel, who is trusting in the sovereign God of the universe, even in, what did I say before, a severely difficult situation when his city has been destroyed. He has been given a new foreign name. He has been brought into a culture he doesn't know. All these things have happened to him, but he is still trusting in God. And I would say this question out to you right now. Are you still trusting in God when things aren't going the way you would like them to go? Because I can tell you right now, for Daniel and his friends, things are not going the way they would like them to go. Family has been killed. The city that they lived in is under enemy occupation. They've been brought into a new situation to the point where they've been given new names, a new culture, a new language. Yet what we're seeing in this black and white text on my page is Daniel, who is still trusting in God, even if he does not fully understand what God is doing. Verse 17, then Daniel went to his house and made the matter known to his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Right? So now we're in the Aramaic. We have their as we're saying the names out there. It's still in the Hebrew that we're seeing there in their names still yet. And he says, and he seeks out his friends to make the matter known to them so that they might seek what? In verse 18, compassion, mercy. Mercy is what they're seeking from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that Daniel and his friends would not be destroyed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. So I want you to think about that for a second. First move when faced with this problem is asking for time, trusting in God's plan, and then seeking the compassion of the God who saves. The mercy of God who saves. Now, they've already seen God's hand at work even in a poor situation, right? They were given vegetables and water, and they looked better than the slaves that were eating the choice foods of the king, right? They are worshiping the Lord in their actions and trusting in the truth that they know about the Lord. They realize, the four of them, their inability. Right? They are fully, when you're asking the Lord for compassion and for mercy, it is recognizing your inability in the situation. And they turn to the only one they can, the triune God, with confidence and expectation that the true men of God would have. What happens? Now, we can say, and we would know, it's a prayerful action that they're doing. When they go and they ask for mercy and compassion, it's like, hey, God, give me mercy and compassion. It isn't like that. This is on your hands and knees. God, please help us in this situation. We can't even lift up our eyes to look into heaven upon you or for you. We are fully in your control. You are the God who sets men in the nations where they live, that puts the boundaries of the nations out. We are in your hands and your hands alone. There is nothing we can do that you haven't already foreseen or foretold is going to happen. We are fully reliant upon you in this situation. Remember what we're going to find in the furnace. His friends say, well, we're not going to worship your gods. We trust that God is going to save us, but even if he chooses not to, we still trust in God. So the question becomes for us in here, do we still trust in God if we don't like it, what's happening right now? Do we still trust in God? Or we just kind of throw, if we didn't win the lottery, get the job, get the car, get the house that we wanted, or do we because if you can throw your belief in God away because you didn't get those things, you never truly believed. Because what I see in the scripture is and we are told time and time and time and time again that you will be persecuted. Every single one of the apostles was persecuted. Look at the early fathers of the faith. How many of them were persecuted for belief in Jesus? Our Savior was nailed to a cross. If you think you are better than him, you're not believing in the right Jesus. Right? So you have these men here. Now remember, they're now about 17 or 18 years old. Right in that range. Maybe even pushing 20 is where they're at. They're young. Right? Hands and knees. God, we're just asking for your mercy upon us. If it's your will that we would live, give us the answer. So that we, not only for ourselves, but we're going to save a whole bunch of other people while we're at it too. Now think about that. They're going to save a whole bunch of conjurers, magicians, sorcerers, whatnot, that are in this city. 19. Then the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. And what's Daniel's first move? Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Can you imagine Daniel, this young man, in this situation where hundreds, if not thousands, because remember, this goes, all wise men are to be killed. Not just the ones that service the king, all of them. That he gets the answer to the dream. And so get this, so God doesn't operate in hidden knowledge like that. He isn't a God like the false gods that they worship that do all sorts of they have hidden things. We can't understand what they're doing. They're not consistent. They do whatever they feel like, these other false gods that they worship. God isn't like that. They have asked for it, the knowledge, and they have clearly received, Daniel has clearly received a revelation. So he blesses the Lord. And then in verse 20, that his blessing, as 19 says, then he blessed the God of heaven. Verse 20, Daniel answered and said, let the name of God be blessed forever and ever. For wisdom and might belong to him. And he changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and establishes kings. He gives wisdom to wise men and knowledge to the men of understanding. Where does wisdom come from? It comes from the Lord. You can see that clearly in Job chapter 38. He reveals. Who reveals? Not men, but God reveals the deep and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells with him. To you, O God of my fathers, I give thanks and praise, for you have given me wisdom and might. Even now you have made known to me what we sought from you, for you have made known to us the king's matter. This was something that was received by Nebuchadnezzar and has now been made known to Daniel. Was given to Nebuchadnezzar and has been made known to Daniel. He has shown mercy to Daniel and his friends. He has shown mercy by helping him understand what the dream was that the king had and its interpretation. So I have a little subheading in verses 24 through 30. It just says, explain it to me. Just a little subheading that was just a reminder for myself, because what we get for. So what happens? Therefore Daniel went to Arioch. Remember, Arioch's the one he went to first. Hey, whoa. Everybody calm down with these swords and these killings and stuff. What's going on here? To Arioch, that's the first guy he went to. The first guy that was in charge. The captain of the king's bodyguard, right? He went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went and said, now, boy, I'm just reading this text and there's so many things are just jumping forth. You see that God's hand is throughout this. Do you think Arioch himself, when given the order from the king, would of his own thoughts, would just stop from slaying the people he was supposed to slay because he himself would be killed? But you see, God's hand is staying all this for God's purposes. Right? Because even through a fallen kingdom of Judah, the red thread of redemption is running through and will come in the fruition of Christ. Right? So he says, therefore Daniel went into Arioch, whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went in and said thus to him, do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. Bring me before the king, and I will declare the interpretation to the king. Then Arioch hurriedly. Now notice what happens here. Arioch hurriedly brought Daniel before the king and said thus to him, hold on a second. I have found a man. Whoa. Now everybody, let's back up the truck for a second. Arioch didn't do any finding. Daniel went to him. The sword is poised to come down and lop heads right off. And the other's like, whoa. Let me consider the matter. It's almost as if Arioch's trying to find additional authority, additional reward, additional position within the king's guard. Hey, I got a guy. So when we see that part back there in verse 16 where he sought from the king that he give him time, and now we see that now he has the interpretation. we see this kind of coalescing and coming together. That when he sought the time, it looks like almost like he went, Arioch is the one who bought a little time at that point in time. And now he's actually going to go see Nebuchadnezzar and get the time and tell him what he saw. He said, I've found a man among the exiles from Judah who can make the interpretation known to the king. I'm trying to seek my own reward here. While I'm at it, I'm going to make my position better. Verse 26, the king answered and said to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, are you able to make known to me the dream which I have seen and its interpretation? Questioning Daniel, do you know the dream? Number one. Do you know the interpretation? Number two. Daniel answered, and this is 27 and 28 are just awesome. Daniel answered before the king. Now, remember when they were selected, right? These young men knew the proper, they were from royalty or noblemen, so they knew the protocols in the throne room, right? They knew the way to act in that particular setting, right? That's why they were chosen for those roles. They knew the proper form of deference. They knew how to address the king. They weren't just people off the street who didn't know, like I don't know where all the forks and the knives and stuff go to and which one, when I'm good with 2 on either side, but you start adding 4 and 5 on either side and, you got bread and beef, whatever you're doing there, trying to figure out what you're doing, right? These are ones that know that stuff. That in the ancient world that there were certain things that transcended all those sort of kingdoms, those empires, right? That you would know that there's an appropriate way to address a king and there's a way that gets you executed for doing it. Now Daniel and his friends know that. And look at how Daniel answers. He answered before the king, coming before the king. There's a chance that he's not even standing when he comes before the king at this. He might be kneeling before the king. The king might be set up on a dais or dais, at a higher position before the king. That we see, we can kind of picture what this is. He's got all authority in the kingdom of Babylon. Right? He says, as for the mystery about which the king is asking, I love this. Neither wise men, conjurers, magicians, nor diviners are able to declare it to the king. Right at that one moment, he could have said, oh yeah, we got the answer. We got it. But he doesn't. Okay, if I just said all that stuff where he's in deference to Babylon, the king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, he's in greater deference to the true king. Because he says in the next verse, however, there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will take place in the last days. This was your dream and the visions of your head while you were on your bed. So rather than taking the glory from God, he says, no, I couldn't do that. Nobody can do that. But the God I worship can do that. And he's the one who's told me what is happening in your kingdom and what will happen in the last days. Verse 29. As for you, O king, while on your bed, your thoughts turn to what would happen in the future. And he, referring to Yahweh, referring to the Lord. By the way, why do we use Yahweh as opposed to the Lord? Other than it's appropriate. But Yahweh is the actual name. Lord and God are titles. Yahweh is an actual name. Lord and God are titles. While in your bed, your thoughts turn to what would happen in the future, and he, God, Yahweh, who reveals mysteries, has made known to you what will happen. Now, I want you to think about this. Daniel is declaring that what he has received isn't from these demons that he worships, but is from the true God that there is. What you have received, Nebuchadnezzar, is from the God I worship. not from a false idol that you worship, or not from a demon god that you worship, of all the choices that they had. He says, has made you known to you what will happen. But as for me, this mystery has not been revealed to me by any wisdom which is in me more than any other living man, but for the purpose of making the interpretation known to the king, that you may know the thoughts of your heart. And I'm just going to take a moment. I want to turn. It's going to take me just a moment to find it. We were talking about this today at lunchtime in Job chapter 38. It is fascinating, the wisdom, as God works in wisdom. If you turn to Job chapter 38, so in Job chapter 38, this is the gird up your loins passage to Job. You're going to have to listen to the words that I say to you. I'm going to question you to find out where you were when I laid the foundations of the earth, where I told the sea it could go no further, where I told the Pleiades or Orion how those constellations move in the sky. You're going to have to listen as I talk, and I'm going to ask you if you were there. Right? This is the context of what God is saying. But he makes a very interesting statement about wisdom. And it's sandwiched right between verses 35 and 37. So in 35 it says, so God's speaking, Yahweh's speaking to Job. He says, can you send forth lightnings that they may go and say to you, here we are? And then he says, who has given wisdom in the innermost being, or given understanding to the mind? And then he says, who can count the clouds by wisdom, or tip the water jars of heaven? So think about that 36. It's a rhetorical question to Job. Where does wisdom come from? He's saying, it comes from me. The wisdom that you have comes from me, the Lord. It doesn't come from you. It comes from me. Now think about that with regard to Daniel. Daniel's saying that same thing. He's saying, listen, yeah, I had no idea. Of my own will and my own desire, I had no idea. But God has revealed this wisdom to me. And I'm going to tell you what it is. It's a dream about the future. That God is a God who knows the end from the beginning. And this dream is going to cover the Gentiles' history from now until they are subject to Israel's Messiah. It's the time of the Gentiles that is going to be given as the interpretation. Now that's going to be a few weeks, but I'm not done yet. So think about this. Luke chapter 21, verse 24. In the section of the text where it's the signs of Christ's return, verse 23, woe to those who are pregnant, to those who are nursing babies in those days, for there will be great distress upon the land and wrath against the people. Verse 24, and they will fall by the edge of the sword and will be led captive into all nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. This is the section, up until that time, the times of the Gentiles fulfilled, is what Nebuchadnezzar's dream is about. And that's what we're going to fall into, not tonight, but as we come into it. But so what do we learn about this? Number one, we notice that the dream is not theological or spiritual that Nebuchadnezzar has had. There is nothing theological or spiritual about the dream Nebuchadnezzar has had. Yet, Daniel has had a theological and a spiritual experience because of it. The dream itself falls within Nebuchadnezzar's understanding or level of understanding. So we could say in conclusion that God is a God of dreams. That doesn't mean that every dream that we seek dreams and seek to interpret our dreams. That's not what I'm saying here. What I'm saying is that there are specific instances where he tells us what he does, that these people have had visions or dreams specifically for a reason and a purpose. They've been recorded in the book to tell us what those are, right? And tell us how the sovereign God of the universe works. He is a God of wisdom and of truth. He is the one who directs the path of the wind, the lightning, the storehouses of hail and rain. He directs where the water lands on the beaches, right? He tells where the stars that go. He's the one, when he created, the stars themselves shouted with joy. He's the one who has named all the stars. Now, if you look at the pictures from the James Webb Space Telescope, and you see how thick the stars are, not an errant one in the universe. Every one created by the Lord God. And here he is using a pagan king to foretell the rise of the Gentiles as part of the coming of the kingdom of the Messiah. It is beginning in the year 605 BC is when it starts. The rise of the Gentile kingdoms, right, as we come into it. The fall of Jerusalem. And will end when Christ himself establishes his kingdom in the end. After that, in Luke 21 and 25 and 28, it says, there will be signs in the sun and the moon and the stars, and on the earth anguish among nations and perplexity at the roaring of the sea and the waves, men fading from fear in the expectation of the things which are coming upon the world. For the powers of the heavens will be shaken, and then they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. And when these things begin to take place, straighten up and lift your heads, because, I love this, your redemption is drawing near. The time when, for all who believe in Jesus Christ, there will no longer be any sin in your lives. It will be taken away. A new heaven and a new earth, new bodies. It's a time of 4 kingdoms that we're going to talk about. And finally, a 5th kingdom that will destroy the others, the kingdom of Christ. The King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. But even over these spectacular things, what we see is the praise and glory given to God by one of his servants, Daniel. We see a servant of the Lord in a very trying situation, death at hand, trusting in the Lord God Almighty for the knowledge and wisdom that is needed. We see a humble servant trusting in the Lord and not relying upon himself to get out of the situation, but holding on to faith and trust that the Lord's plan is working and isn't correct. We see the picture of a humble servant who follows the pathway of the Lord, even in exceedingly difficult situations. It is a person who is listening rather than telling the Lord. Daniel has displayed trust and obedience to God who is omnipotent. This is demonstrated in his prayer of faith to the God who listens and answers. The God who knows the beginning from the end. The question for you then, the question for me is this the God to whom you believe and to whom you pray? Do you pray in faith to God who answers prayer in faith? Do you pray with the faith that God has given you? Asking him, when we pray in faith, asking him to accomplish what he has promised. James chapter 1 verses 5 and 8, but if any of you lacks wisdom, what do? Let him ask of God, who gives to all generously without reproach. It will be given to him. But he must ask in faith, doubting nothing, for the one who doubts is like the surf of the sea, driven and tossed by the wind. Do you pray without doubting? Do you pray that God will bring about what he promises to bring about? Or do you feebly say, or do you cower before I say, well, I can't, I don't like it. Well, guess what? You were made for a time such as this. You were made for a time such as this. Gird up your loins, as God would say, and act like a Christian. Christians are not supposed to be filled with cowardice. They're supposed to be filled with courage because everything has been taken care of. There is no death. It doesn't matter if that bank account is empty. What matters is that you're filled with Christ. I mean, this is what we need. This is what we see with Daniel. He's not cowering. He's saying, give me more time. Let me consult with my God. Rather than these false gods that you're consulting with. You must ask in faith, doubting nothing, for the one who doubts is like the surf of the sea, driven and tossed by the wind. For the man ought not to expect that he will receive anything for that man ought not to expect that he will receive anything from the Lord, being a double-minded man, what? Unstable in his ways. The Christian should reflect stability. When everything is going mad around you, the Christian should be the one that's standing tall. The one that trusts in Jesus, that is not being tossed like a wave in the ocean, but is standing firm and trusting in God. If God wills that I live, then I will live. If not, He will bear me into His arms, and I'm going to be better off than I am here. Right? This is what we see by Daniel. We see prayer in faith. Prayer in faith that God will accomplish what He says He will do. Let's pray.